let's go and take a look at the cheat sheet. And the cheat sheet is going to hopefully kind of put everything in one place. Now I couldn't fit it in one slide, so I made it in two different slides. I did the requirement for the aircraft first to meet those requirements of category 1 through 4, actually 3, and then the operating limitations. I did not include category 4 because, as you saw, category 4 is pretty much its own little thing. It all depends on the type certificate under part 21. So I'm keeping it simple, 1 through 3. The weight limit, 0.55 pounds or less, is going to be for category 1. For category 2 is going to be less than 55 pounds to fall under this category. And then we have the eligibility requirement for category 1, pretty simple. No exposed rotating parts that can cause laceration. That's it. We also have that requirement for category 2 and 3, but we have additional ones. No defect is one of them. And then for category 2, 11 foot-pound of kinetic energy limit, and then 25 foot-pound of energy limit for the category 3. And then the next thing is the MOC, means of compliance. None for category 1. It is required for category 2 and 3. And then the label requirement, only required for category 2 and required for category 3. So that's for the aircraft in itself. In terms of the operating limitations, can you do sustained flights over open air assembly? In a category 1, yes, if you meet the remote ID requirements. And also for category 2, same answer. For category 3 is a no. You can't fly over open air assembly. Can you fly anywhere else over as a sustained flight? And the answer is yes for category 1 and also yes for category 2. There's a little caveat right here. Yes, you can do these things even before September 16 of 2023. You don't have to meet remote ID in this case, so that's kind of a good thing. But so anywhere else than over open air assembly. For category 3, can you do sustained flights over people outside of open air assembly? Yes, you can, as long as you're inside of a restricted area and you have notified people, or if these people are under a structure, or if they are inside of a non-moving vehicle. So that's the requirement right here. And then the next one is, can you do transitioning? Remember I said there's 3 different ways that you're going to be flying. Can you do a transition, a one-time transition to go from point A to point B? For category 1, yes, you can. And you can also do it over open air assembly as long as you're not hovering or doing sustained flight. And you can do that without remote ID requirement. And then for category 2, same thing as category 1. And for category 3, yes, you can, but not over open air assembly. So you just can't fly over open air assembly with category 3. Okay, let's define, I know we've mentioned them already, but I want to talk a little bit more about this moving, rotating part thing. There's different methods that actually can be used in order to prevent the moving parts from creating laceration on the drone. One is prop guards, and this might be the obvious one. Now, for category 1, it's going to be tough. Let's say, for example, the Mini 2, and I'm sure there will be more drones in the future after I record this video, but the Mini 2 is 242 grams without the prop guards, and it's 289 with the prop guards, which means that it puts it outside of category 1. So for category 1, it's not really a good way to do this, unless you can find very, very, very lightweight prop guards. Another option would be automatic motor stop that would stop the rotating props when there is an emergency, and then the drone can qualify in this case. Let's talk about this closed or restricted access area. The FAA actually has a bit of a definition or a bit of guidance in the documentation. It says, the FAA defines closed or restricted access areas as areas where the remote pilot must ensure no inadvertent or unauthorized access can occur. Okay, you make of that what you want. You have to think about, hey, when we talk about if you have a category 3 and you need to create a restricted area, this is how you're going to do it. And the FAA says you can use physical barriers, you can use personnel to stop people, or you can use both. So that's one way of doing it. And the next part of this was people need to be on notice. What does on notice means? And the FAA actually has suggestions in here on how to give notice to people. And they say using one of the several methods to notify people that the UAS will be operating in the area. Public notices, signage, flagging is one of the options. A written notice is actually one of the one they say is probably better because now you have something in writing that you can prove you actually provided. So a written notice posted at the entry point of the area, or using a verbal notice. A verbal notice is technically enough, but if something happens, people can say, well, you never told me, then you don't have proof of it. So use a written notice, I think is the easiest. Create a little flyer. If you're operating over an area that is going to be enclosed, then just provide that to people, and then they know that you're going to be flying. Wind, then you can actually hit someone even though you weren't flying right on top of them. I'll give you a perfect example. I did some testing with a parachute. I wanted to test this cheap parachute from Amazon and see if it was actually worth it. Well, we failed the motors in flight on purpose. The parachute deployed, and then the parachute kept on going and going and going. Now, I was expecting that because I knew it was a little bit windy, especially at higher altitude, and I knew that it was going to keep on going. So we had people on the ground. We were in an area with no one around us, so that made it safe. But in this case, we were never over anyone, but we could have at one point hit someone with the drone because it was on a parachute and then kind of uncontrollable at this stage. So something to think about. And then the last thing is think about the movement of other people and the movement of other vehicles. If there's a large group of people that are moving, you may be not on top of them at this 1 minute, but a minute later, the group may be right underneath the drone. So something to also consider in your operation over people and over moving vehicles. 107, 145 is flying over moving vehicles. And we've talked about flying over people. Flying over moving vehicles is slightly different, but related to that one. So if you have a category 1, 2, 3, or 4, you must meet all the requirements that I just mentioned. Everything I mentioned, imagine that flying over moving vehicles is like flying over people, which it is, right? Plus some additional requirements. So everything we've talked about, plus you need to remain within an enclosed area, a closed site, and everyone in the moving vehicle must be on notice. So they've added an additional layer right here. They said, okay, fine, you can fly over moving cars, you can fly over moving trucks, over moving whatever, but it needs to be done in a restricted area. They basically don't want you to be flying over a highway for a sustained amount of time, because that increases the risk. Remember, it's all about risk. The other option is if you can't do this over a restricted area, then they're saying that the UAS must not maintain sustained flight. So, an example from before that people have asked a lot, and that I have been in this situation. I'm doing a photo shoot, video shoot, and I have to cross a highway. Well, in the past, what I did is I would put the camera down and I would wait and I would look and I would look and I would look. And then when no cars were coming, then I would cross the road, just like you would, on the sidewalk. Now you can do this because you would be flying over moving vehicles, but you would not be doing sustained flight. So you're just transitioning. As long as you still have a category 1, 2, or 3, then you can do that. Don't go out there with a drone that doesn't qualify as 1, 2, or 3, or 4 and go ahead and do that, okay? That is not legal. But if you have a cat 1, 2, 3, then you can basically do quick passing, or if you're going to be doing sustained flight. Let's say I have a friend, Don, who does video shoots of motorbikes, and motorbikes are moving vehicles. And in this case, he could be, because it's an enclosed area, right? He could basically provide notice to all the riders and say, hey, we're going to be operating right here. Or if you're flying over cars that do drifting. We see this a lot on videos. It looks really cool. Well, now you can do it because this is on a circuit. So in this case, it would be an enclosed area, and then you give people notice. Now you can fly over a moving vehicle as a sustained thing, which is really cool. So opens up a lot of capabilities. But remember, you need a category 1, 2, or 3 in order to do this. Now you may ask, what is a vehicle? And a vehicle is, the FAA defines it as a bunch of different things. It's any means of transportation, regardless if it has a motor or not. A car, a truck, a bus, a train, motorcycle, scooter. Obviously, all of these are all vehicles because they're motorized, so they're pretty obvious. A bicycle is also considered a vehicle. A watercraft is going to be a vehicle. They put this in here. Sightseeing vessels, motorboats, personal watercraft, all of these are considered vehicles. So let me give you a couple examples. One of the examples is you fly over your friend on his or her motorcycle on a racetrack. Is it legal or not? Well, the answer is right here. The answer is it is legal if the site is restricted and everyone is on notice that is at the site. The next one is you need to cross a highway for a shot. It is legal as long as there is no sustained flight, you only in transit. And again, obviously, as long as you have a Cat 1, 2, or 3 drone, that applies. You're recording a video by flying directly over a sightseeing boat that you notice in the distance. Is this legal? It's not, because they are not on notice in this case. It could be argued that that area is not a restricted area because it hasn't been roped off or it doesn't prevent other people from getting in. So that's kind of a double whammy here. It's a double no-no. Submit the necessary document. All right, good job going over the categories of drone. I know this is a difficult section. You may have watched it a couple times. There's nothing wrong with that. Remember, this is only for operations over moving vehicles and people inside of moving vehicles. So if you are flying regular operation, you don't need to worry about these categories of drone. If you plan on flying over people or moving vehicles, then you have to worry about it. Now, quick review. Category 1 can be self-certified. So if you have a drone that meets those requirements, sub 250 grams, it doesn't cause any laceration, then with everything installed on it, then you can fly over people with some limitations. You've seen that. If you don't fall into category 1, the manufacturer has to submit the necessary documentation to the FAA. You can't do that. You as the regular person is not going to do that. So you'll have to go to the FAA website, the DOC website, and then see if DJI, Autel, you name it, has submitted the paperwork to get your drone approved. Hint, it probably is not approved. There is only very few drones at the moment that are approved as a category 2, 3, or 4. There's a handful that are approved as category 1 because it's a self-certification. It's a lot easier. Now, great job sticking with this. Make sure you take a break. This is probably a great time to do it, and then move on to the next section. All right, we're done with that section. Let's move over to subpart E and let's talk about waivers. And waivers is a part that was in here. Actually, it used to be subpart D, not subpart E. But there's a list of regulation that is subject to waivers. And that list is contained in 107.205. And you can go in here and you say, hey, what if I want to operate? Let's take the first example right here. What if I want to operate from a moving vehicle or an aircraft and I want to waive that regulation that's in 107.25? You can apply for a waiver with the FAA, provide them with information as to how you're going to make this safe, and then you'll be good to go. Hopefully, they provide you a waiver and then you can fly. In the past, we had a requirement for night operation. It was called daylight operation. You had a waiver to waive the fact that you could only fly during the day. Now, things have changed, obviously, but that was part of it. 107.29, this is actually the one that used to be daylight waiver. Now it's going to be changed to anti-collision light requirement. You can actually waive the requirement for having an anti-collision light on your aircraft. You can waive 107.31, the visual line of sight requirement. That's a tough one. You're going to have some equipment on board. 107.33, if there is operation that requires a visual observer, which is not always, but in this case, you can actually waive that portion with 107.33. 107.35, operation of multiple small aircraft. Think about the people that fly all these drones that have lights on them that do the light show. They are operating more than one aircraft at a time, so that would fall under this section right here. 107.37a, yielding the right of way. I've never heard of anyone being provided this waiver or reason why you wouldn't want to apply for that, but it is an option. We have 107.39, operation over people. That is one of the option in here. We can waive some of these requirements in here. Operation in certain airspace, 107.41, that's a pretty difficult one to get. Usually you don't get a waiver, you get an authorization to fly in the airspace. People get confused between the two. We have operation limitation for small unmanned aircraft system, 107.51. If you remember this section, there was a lot of information in there. The 400 feet, the flying over 100 knots and 100 miles an hour and all of that. So that was all in here. And then operation over moving vehicle, 107.145 can actually be waived as well. So all these requirements here, if you wanted to get them waived, you would go on the FAA website, faa.dronezone.faa.gov, and then you would be able to get that information on how to submit them. Each of them is different. The waiver is different for all of them. Remember, airspace waiver and authorization are two different things. We're going to talk about authorizations to fly in controlled airspace in the future chapter when we get to the airspace section. Now, there's a whole chapter in the Code of Federal Regulation that talks about requirements for registration for drones. 4825B, it says, a small unmanned aircraft must be registered by its owner using the legal name. That's interesting. You have to use the legal name of the owner unless the owner is less than 13 years old, in which case then a parent would have to register. So they're basically saying the age limit to register a drone is 13 years old. In the next one, it says 48.3, the fee for issuing or renewing a certificate of registration is $5 per person if you're flying as a hobbyist under section 449, so 349. So the registration for hobbyist is interesting because you really register the pilot. The pilot gets that number and then it can be put on all the other aircraft. And then if you're doing it under Part 107, then it's $5 per aircraft that will be flying under Part 107. I hear this all the time. People say, do I have to register for both? You don't, actually. If you register under Part 107, it's also valid as a hobbyist. So you only have to register once. And if you register as Part 107, just put the Part 107 number on there. Now, if you have a scenario where you have 3 drones, one of them is going to be flown under Part 107, then you just register that one, pay $5. The other 2 can go on your hobbyist registration and just keep flying them for fun. But every drone has to be registered under Part 107. And here, I'm going to save you from getting scammed from people that do this online. It's only $5, and the only place to register a drone is on the FAA Drone Zone website, faa.dronezone.faa.gov. There are people out there that scam people out of $30, $40, $50 to register their drones for them when you can do it all by yourself and just pay $5. You will not get stickers from the FAA. The FAA is just going to give you a PDF that shows that you registered your drone. Cut that little card, put it in your flight bag, and then you have it. I have my registration cards in an envelope in my flight bag, and then I keep all of them in there, and then I know when they expire, but that's it. Just $5. Print a label on a label maker, and then put it on the drone, and then you'll be good to go. 4820, the eligibility for registration. It says a small unmanned aircraft may be registered only when the aircraft is not registered under the laws of a foreign country. This is interesting. If your drone is registered somewhere else in a different country and you're coming to visit in the US, which is probably not going to be the case for you, but in that case, then it cannot be also registered in the US. So the drone has to be owned by a US citizen, and it has to be owned by an individual citizen of a foreign country that is lawfully admitted for permanent residence in the United States. This is just a fancy word for saying somebody who's a permanent resident, which is the green card, if you heard the term green card in here. 48120A says that the registration is invalid if the aircraft is registered in a foreign country. Again, this may not apply to you, but it's something that I have to teach you. The next thing in here is, what about foreign nationals? And it says, if you want to operate your UAS exclusively as a hobbyist, you can actually register it in the US if you're a foreign national. The certificate then will be issued is going to be like a recognition of ownership of the aircraft rather than being really an aircraft registration. So in this case, if you're flying as a hobbyist, it's a lot easier. But if you're flying under Part 107, then it's going to be completely different. You have to look under Part 375. So if you're a foreigner coming in the US to operate for commercial purposes and your drone is registered in a different country, then there's a whole process to go through in order to get it registered. Again, probably not something that's going to happen to you, but I need to mention it in here. 48105B is interesting because people get confused with that one and the change of address rules. Change of address, you have to do it within 30 days. Now here what it says is that you need to update the information in the FAA drone zone for registration within 14 days, 14 calendar days of the following. If you change the information provided initially, let's say that well, your address actually goes in here. So if you had to change that, you have to actually do that within 14 days. This is registration, different than your pilot certificate, okay? It says, if you need to cancel your registration for any reason, if you sell it, if you transfer it, if you destroyed the drone, if you exported it, then you need to tell the FAA within 14 days. I'll give you a perfect example. Somebody goes and crashes the drone into a tree. The drone can't be used anymore. You have to go in the FAA website within 14 days and tell the FAA that the drone is no longer operational, it's been destructed and it has been destroyed, and then it's not going to be used. If you sell a drone to somebody else, you have to go in there as well. If you don't do that, then you can be liable, because let's say that they go and do something stupid and then the FAA finds the drone on the airport property at a large airport, then in this case, you're going to be in trouble because the FAA is going to find out that this was your drone and you never unregistered the drone. Here's another number to put in your little notepad. Registration renewal. Registration is good for 3 years. I did not say 36 calendar months. I said 3 years. If you register today, October 7th, it's going to be good until October 7th, 3 years down the road, okay? And then you have to renew it again. The renewal can be done up to 6 months before the renewal date, so it can be done up to 6 months in advance. And this is what your registration card is going to look like. This was just an example from one of mine, where it says serial number, you'd have the serial number, and then it says certificate number, FA, and then there's more letters after this that I removed in here, but that's the number that you would actually put on your UAS at this stage. That's what you would print on that label. And I would also, like, remember what I said, I would put that expiration date of 2021 right here on the document. But you can see it is 3 years to the day going onto that certificate. 48205 says that the unique identifier must be maintained in a good condition that is legible. It has to be, that's the FA number that you put on your drone. It has to be legible. It has to be affixed for the duration of each operation, and it has to be displayed on the outside. I've mentioned this before. You can't put that in the battery compartment anymore. One of the last few topics, we're almost done, is remote identification. And remote identification is around the corner, but still pretty far. But the FAA does have questions on the test. And as you know, I'm not only teaching to the test, but I wanted to give you some information about remote ID as well. So what you'll see next, it is something that you need to know for the exam, but it's also something to know for, just operating in real life. So what is remote ID? You probably heard this term before. You may have even seen me talk about this on YouTube videos before, but remote ID is what the FAA calls a license plate for drones. It's a way that the FAA is going to be using, the FAA and law enforcement, even the general public, in order to identify drones that are flying within a certain area. So I'm going to talk about the technology, what the regulation actually is. Everything about remote ID is contained in 14 CFR Part 89. This is a new part. As of 2021, this is something that we didn't have before that is now located in here. So if we look at the methods in order to do this, there's 3 different ways that we can comply with remote ID. The first one is to get an aircraft that is going to be equipped with a remote ID system. It's going to be called standard remote ID, and that's the first method. That's probably the easiest. DJI, Autel, all the big manufacturers have drones that are equipped with remote ID as standard. Boom, you buy it, you charge the batteries, you turn it on, and there you have your remote ID. So the next option is to get a module, a remote ID module that you're going to put on top of the aircraft that is going to broadcast the signal. And that's going to be great if you have drones that are a bit older, that do not meet the requirement directly for remote ID. That's what you're going to want to do, is use a remote ID module. And then the last one is if you don't want to comply at all with remote ID by buying a new drone or by putting a module on top of it, then you can fly at a specific area. It's called FRIA. It's an FAA recognized identification area. And these areas are, I like to define them as a big dome, okay, of where you don't need to comply with remote ID. It's kind of like a safe space where you don't need to comply with remote ID. So those are the three methods. I'm going to get back to them in a minute, kind of give you a bit more information about each, but that's kind of your overview right here. Now, you may read or you may already know about ADS-B, and ADS-B is this technology that is being utilized by manned aircraft in order to send their position. ADS-B is the equivalent of remote ID for manned aircraft, and it's been a requirement since January of 2020 by the FAA. So aircraft send their position using this ADS-B technology. Now, what the FAA has said is ADS-B is great for manned aircraft. It is not great for unmanned aircraft. There's going to be a lot more unmanned aircraft flying than manned aircraft. So the FAA said, you're going to saturate the system if we use ADS-B for drones. So we're not going to do that. Now, this might sound confusing sometimes because manufacturers like DJI has a technology called AirSense, and AirSense uses ADS-B technology, but it uses the technology from the aircraft. It captures, it collects the data that aircraft are sending via ADS-B, and then is displaying it on your screen. So if you have a drone that has AirSense, you have this little pop-up that shows up and that says, hey, there's a manned aircraft in the area, pay attention. So that's the way that they use it. They're not broadcasting on ADS-B, they're just collecting the data basically from manned aircraft. So we're not going to be using ADS-B for UAS other than capturing the data like DJI does, but that's kind of the big deal about this regulation at the moment. And the last thing here, in addition to ADS-B, we are not allowed to install, it's called a 4096 transponder. That may not mean much to you, but that's the type of transponder that we use on manned aircraft, where you can enter a 4-digit code to be identified by air traffic control. So that's not allowed either. We can use ADS-B, but we also can't use a transponder to send our information to ATC. You may ask, who can do? You may ask, who must comply with remote ID regulation? Do I have to do it if I have like a small drone, for example, that's less than 250 grams? Well, the answer is yes and no. Okay, so let's take a look at this. The way that you remember this is very simple. Any aircraft that is required to be registered is going to be required to have remote ID. Any aircraft that requires to be registered needs to have remote ID. So with that being said, if you're flying under Part 107, any aircraft that is under 55 pounds needs to be registered, which means that any aircraft under 55 pounds operated under Part 107 needs to have remote ID starting in 2023, okay? That means that if you have a small drone, sub 250 grams, a Mavic Mini, Mini 2, Mini 3, Mini 4, whatever they're at by the time you watch this video, these drones need to comply with remote ID if they are operated under Part 107. Now, as a recreational flyer, flying a drone under 250 grams as a recreational flyer does not require registration, which means that it does not require remote ID. So if you're flying a Mini or any drone under 250 grams, for recreational purposes, then you don't need to meet the requirement for remote ID. So it gets confusing a little bit because it depends on how you utilize the drone. Now, for the majority of the other drones, anything between 250 and 55 pounds, it doesn't matter because it needs to be registered if you're flying for fun or if you're flying under Part 107. So in this case, there's no real confusion. The 250 gram is always a bit of a confusion. Aircraft that are operated under public safety, for all of our public safety students, do have to comply as well with remote ID. There are some exceptions. If drones are being utilized by the federal government, they don't have to be to meet the requirement, but everybody else, state government, local government, tribal government, they all have to meet the requirements for remote ID. About the message. Let's talk about the message. Let's talk about the information that is going to be sent from these drones. And there's two different messages. It's going to be called a message, and the message depends on the type of method that you use. Remember, there's three different methods. Well, there's only two here in this graph. If you're flying as a remote ID drone that is approved standard remote ID drone, or if you're putting a module, the message is going to be a little bit different. If you're using a drone that is already approved as standard remote ID, then the message is going to consist of several things. It's going to consist of the serial number of the aircraft. Think about this as the license plate on your car. Or it can also be what we call a session ID. Now, a session ID is going to be a randomized number that's going to be provided to you that's going to be different every single time you fly. There are situations where having a session ID is going to be something that you want to have, so it is available right here. Now, at the moment, as I'm recording this video, there's no method to make that happen. So they're still trying to figure out how this is going to happen, but if that gets updated, then I'll update the video as well. The other message, which is common to the module as well, is that we're going to have the latitude and longitude, altitude, and velocity of the aircraft as part of the message. And latitude, longitude, you guys understand that, altitude, and then also the velocity. Velocity means not only the speed of the aircraft, but it also means the direction in which the aircraft is going. So that's all going to be contained in that message. It's all something that's going to be broadcasted from the aircraft in itself. The aircraft is also going to be sending, part of the message is going to be sending the latitude, longitude, altitude of the control station. The control station is the controller that you hold in your hand. That location, if you move to a different location, that is also going to be broadcasted as part of the message. There's going to be an emergency status. That emergency status is going to be, for example, if the aircraft has lost connection, then it's something that can be indicated in the message. If there's a low battery warning, for example, there's not really a full list because that's going to be up to the manufacturer to put something in here. But the FAA says that this message is going to be available. It can actually be turned on either by the pilot or automatically by the drone. So imagine that you're flying your drone and then you have a lost link situation where you lose control between the drone and the controller. Then the aircraft automatically is going to display that on the message to let people know, hey, this is kind of a rogue drone that's flying around with nobody controlling it. So that's not a bad thing, by the way. And then there's going to be a timestamp that says when the signal was sent. The signal has to be sent every second, so it's going to be updated every second with all of the information that's right here. Now, if you have a module on top of it, which is the second method that you can use, there's also going to be the serial number of the module that's going to be broadcasted. So that's, again, the license plate. Latitude, longitude, altitude, velocity. This is also the same thing as what we had before. Now, a little bit different here. Latitude, longitude, altitude of the takeoff point. Because that module is really just a dongle that you put on top of the drone. It doesn't really talk to the controller, so it doesn't know where the controller is located. So all that the module is recording is the position from which you took off from. So if you decide to walk a mile down the road, then nobody will know based on the message. They'll only know where you took off from. And then there's no emergency status because the module in itself is not designed to talk directly to the drone. It's just supposed to be sitting basically on top. and there's also a time mark in here. So that's your message. That's remember these pieces right here. They're pretty important. I've been hearing reports that the FAA does ask about what is in the message. So something that you need to remember right here. This to people is imagine you. Let's take a look at this little animation to see how this actually works. The way that I've been explaining this to people is imagine your drone being a Wi-Fi router. Okay, it's a flying Wi-Fi router. Your Wi-Fi at home, if you have one, it basically sends the internet to all the devices, and then the devices connect to the Wi-Fi router, and that's it. Well, the idea is the same right here. Your drone is going to be broadcasting a signal using Wi-Fi or using Bluetooth. And then there's going to be devices on the ground. So as the drone flies around, what happens is we're going to have people on the ground like the FAA, law enforcement, that are going to be able to receive the message. And the way that they do it is very simple. Either they're going to have a specialized device that does this, or they can actually use a mobile device that's going to have an app that's going to be able to identify the signal, the Wi-Fi signal that's being sent from the drone, and then be captured and be displayed on the cell phone. Now, there's an additional piece to the puzzle, the fact that the general public can also access the data at the same time. You're flying right here, I'm in the studio, I go out the door, I see a drone flying, and I want to find out more information about it. I can pull my cell phone, and then I can basically connect to the drone, find information about it, and then go my merry way. So that's something that the FAA has been wanting to do, and that's something that we have now available in this regulation. So you may be asking, who's going to be seeing this remote ID message? Well, I kind of answered this question already, but anyone with a mobile device and the proper app is going to be able to see the message. Now, with that being said, the registration database in itself that has your name, your phone number, and everything, that is only accessible to the FAA, and upon request, it's available to law enforcement and national security agencies. So the FAA is kind of the gatekeeper of this data, and then the other agencies can request the information from the FAA. But the general public does not have access to your name, your phone number, or your address or anything. All they have is really the location of the drone, and sadly, the location of the controller. Now, it's something that, this is kind of a personal opinion. I don't do this in the course usually, but this is something that I've been against from day one when the FAA proposed to do this. The fact that your location is going to be available to the general public as you fly your drone. And I disagree with it. Point being, it's still in the regulation, unfortunately. So the range in itself is going to vary depending on the type of aircraft. It could be several miles, actually. They have said that they did some testing where the signal can go several miles. Okay, let's go back to the several different methods that we have. Method number one, get a remote ID equipped aircraft. This is called standard remote ID. And in this case, we're gonna have a radio frequency signal that's gonna be broadcasted from the drone in itself. And that can use Wi-Fi, it can use Bluetooth. That's what the FAA has. Now, they don't have this in the regulation per se. They're just saying a radio broadcast message. But with that being said, at the moment, this is the technology that we have. We could have something different in the future, and the FAA made it general enough that we can use different technology if it becomes available. Method number two, your remote ID module. Okay, that's going to be a separate device. You slap it on top of the drone. Pretty lightweight. It should be fairly inexpensive as well. That's going to be great for retrofitting older aircraft or home-built aircraft. So if you like to make your own aircraft, fixed wing or FPV drones or whatever else, you'll just be able to put that little device on there, and then you'll be good to go. Now, the serial number, the module in itself is going to have a serial number, and then you're going to report that to the FAA on your registration. So I'll talk about registration in a second and how that's going to work, but that's kind of part of the equation right here. And with the remote ID module, you are going to be limited to always flying within visual line of sight. Now you're going to say, can you fly beyond visual line of sight with a standard remote ID drone, the method number one? Not necessarily, but it is an option. So if you have the proper waivers, you'll be able to do that. But if you have a remote ID module, not at the moment. And this may all be changing in the future. I foresee that all of this is going to be changing in the fairly near future within several years. Just personal opinion. Okay. Operational requirements. Some of the things that have to be done when you're flying either with a module or when you're flying with a standard remote ID aircraft. The message in itself has to be on from the time of takeoff to the time of shutdown. Now, when I say shutdown, I don't mean landing. Landing is one thing, and then shutting down. So if you have a standard remote ID aircraft, that's going to be done automatically. If you have a module, you're going to have to turn that on before you take off, and then turn it on after you shut down. Turn it off after you shut down the aircraft. One of the requirements is that it cannot be turned off. Now, with a module, that's going to be something that you do manually, but with the standard remote ID aircraft, it's going to be done automatically. You won't be able to turn that off. And if the functionality, the broadcast functionality is not working correctly, then you won't be able to take off at all. So the drone is going to be grounded if there's a self test is not working properly, then you won't be able to take off. Now the broadcast always has to be done from the aircraft. You cannot have the module on the controller. It has to follow the aircraft and be sent from the aircraft. Now you're going to say, what about loss of broadcast? You're flying and then all of a sudden you don't have broadcast capabilities anymore. Well, the FAA says that the system in itself is going to have a self-test functionality, and it's going to have the ability to send a signal to the operator in case something happens, in case the broadcast fails, at which point the operator is going to have to come back as soon as practicable. That's what the FAA says. They're basically saying, don't land immediately, just come back safely and then terminate the mission. The self-test is going to be interesting with the module because the module is going to have to be turned on manually. It's not connected to the drone in itself. So there's going to be two different types of operation here depending on how you comply with remote ID. There's a labeling requirement for either a module or a remote ID compliant aircraft. You're going to have a display that says that it meets the requirement of Part 89, which is what we're looking at right now, Part 89. The FAA expects that the drone manufacturers are going to send stickers to put on the drone if it's retrofitted by software. We don't really know at the time of recording this, we don't really know how the older drones are going to be made compliant, if they're going to be made compliant. So this is kind of what the FAA is hoping that manufacturers are going to do. The last method for remote ID is called the FRIA, I think they call it FRIA, FAA Recognized Identification Area. And this is a place where you'll be able to fly without remote ID. Maybe you have a really old aircraft and it's very lightweight and you don't want to add anything to it, then you'll be able to fly there. Think about this as your AMA field. Think about this as maybe there's a school that has an area where you can fly, a college, they're going to open this up to primary, secondary institutions, trade schools, colleges, universities are going to be able to apply for the status of FRIA. And that's going to happen a little bit later in 2022. And you're going to have to maintain visual line of sight when you fly there, and you're going to have to stay within the boundaries of the FRIA. So you'll have to fly from within the FRIA, and then the aircraft is going to have to stay within. Just imagine, again, that bubble of it's an area where remote ID is not required. All right, folks, remote ID is here, and I know you have a lot of questions. The first one might be, what happens if you have an older drone? What happens if you build your old drone? When do you need to have a module, and how many of these modules are you going to need? How do you verify that the module is actually transmitting? And then lastly, what module should you buy? So we're here to answer those questions and more. But first, let's go ahead and take a look at the modules that are out there. Now, we found 9 of them. There's 9 remote ID modules that we put to the test. But wait, before we get into this, remember that you only need to have a module if your drone is not currently remote ID compliant. Where do you have to check? You're going to go down to this link right right here, and you're going to filter by RID, remote ID. This will tell you if your drone is compliant. If it is listed in there, you don't need to have one of these modules unless you have an older drone. Now, all of these modules we are about to discuss are FAA approved at this time. For recreational operators, you only need to have one module. This will work for all of your recreationally registered drones. You can swap it in between the flights and ensure that your either Mavic Pro or Euphony is compliant. For Part 107, you will need to have a module for every single drone that is currently not compliant. So each of these modules will need to be registered for the aircraft registration number in the FAA drone zone. So let's get started and let's take a look at first the approved standalone broadcast modules. These look very much like this. They have an internal battery. They can be turned on or off using a button or a switch on the side. And these are very useful if you don't want to wire anything up or if you have an older consumer drone. Now for our test, these are pretty much straight out of the box. There's no settings that were changed in here, just like you would if you just bought it and went for your first flight. First up in this category is the DB120 from Bluemark, which, believe it or not, is the cheapest in the category at $140. That's right. It weighs about 24 grams, uses Bluetooth and WLAN, and it runs for 3 hours. It looks like, well, this thing right here, which is kind of bulky if you ask me. It uses a USB-C charger in the back and is turned on or off using a red switch on the side. Next to the switch is the charging status, and when you turn it on, the DB120 shows the battery percentage on one side using 4 different lights, and on the other side you can see the status light next to the configuration switch. Now for usage here in the US, there's no configuration required. You'll be able to see the serial number from the DB120 label that is at the bottom of the module. Now let's address the question that many of you are going to be asking of all these modules is how far away can you detect this thing? And utilizing our BVLOS waiver, we actually went to test 5 different apps on Android, on Apple, and we even used a UAS Sentry receiver to see if it made a difference. Now this module's longest range that we were able to capture was 2,935 feet, so short of 3,000 feet with the Air Sentinel app on Android. Now we'll talk about more about the performance of the apps towards the end of the video. Now let's go ahead and talk about the Pierce Aerospace, which comes in at a whopping $264. Yes, I know that's quite steep right there. It weighs 30 grams and it uses 2.4 gigahertz. I'm not sure if it's Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, actually they didn't say on the website. It's got a 6 hour of runtime. Now the B1 operates using an on and off switch that is located in the back. It charges using USB-C and it has a status light on top of it. Now the B1 comes with a laminated reference card that's going to show the status light explanation and then also the serial number. This is by far the furthest that we were able to pick up a remote ID of all the testing. It went up to 5,000 feet using the Drone Scanner app on Android. Quite impressive actually as far as performance is concerned. Continuing with the next module, we have the DroneTag Mini, which they should have called a Mini SE because it costs as much as a DJI Mini SE at $327. That's right, I'm going to say that again, $327, which is quite insane. Now, we're going to take off here, get out of the way. There you go. All right, let's get out of the way. And this drone right here uses Bluetooth, and it is actually one of the heaviest, 32 grams. It's going to operate for 8 to 14 hours. This has micro USB charging, along with the MavLink support and then also LTE compatibility. Now the Mini serial number is on the side of the module. It has a button that you can use to turn it on. And then if you click once, you'll see the battery indication, a long press to turn on the device on or off. And then in addition to all this, once it's on, you can actually do a short press on it, and it's got this thing that does the tracking feature, which is pretty cool. So you'll be able to go back and see your flights from the app. Now, if you're using one of these drones, you already have that, but it's a cool additional features. I guess for the price, well, you need to have that many features to justify it. Now, in our testing, the DroneTag Mini range was, well, only 1,640 feet using the Drone ID app. That's the furthest that we were able to pick it up. Now, I'm going to bring this thing back, and then we're going to move on to the final module, which is going to be the DroneTag Beacon. This little thing right here is small smaller and cheaper than the Mini, and it also cuts out many of the features that, well, the average pilot is not going to be using. The Beacon is still pretty expensive at $229. It uses Bluetooth. It runs 6 to 18 hours of battery and it weighs 16 grams. Now, like the Mini, the Beacon has both the flight controller extension port and the Bluetooth antenna extension, and it can be charged using a micro USB connector. Now, the power is turned on by using a button on the side right here. It's an on and off with a long press. If you do the short press, just like the other one, you will be turning on the tracking function. Now, we tested this one and we were really surprised. Only 341 feet using the drone scanner app. This is the furthest that we were able to pick it up. If you really don't want to be detected, I hate to say it, but this is your module right here. All right, well, this wraps up the standalone module category. Next up, we're going to be talking about the add-on modules. These are the modules that require power in order to operate, but they contain everything else: GPS, broadcast system, etc., that is needed to be compliant. Now, this is best for all the folks that are flying FOMIs or maybe FPV, and they just want a plug-and-play solution in order to be compliant. Now, unfortunately, because of the lack of availability of parts, we were not able to test the range on all 4 of these modules. The first one in the category is the Bluemark DB121. Now, this module requires power in the form of a 5 to 14 volt DC. That's 2S to 3S. Now, the module cost is $119. That's right, these modules are a lot cheaper than the ones we saw in the previous category. It uses Bluetooth and WLAN. It weighs 11 grams only, pretty lightweight. Similar to the DB120, the module has a configuration button and a status light that's going to show that the module is operating correctly. Now, next up is the Flight Test Easy ID, which is currently priced at $109. It weighs 10 grams, uses Bluetooth. The module can be powered with 7.4 to 30.4 volt, which is 2S to 8S, and it comes without a case. Now, it can be purchased with or without the connector. Now, this module connects to the Flight Test app, which is available on Android and Apple, and is going to provide additional functionalities such as Find My Drone, a logbook, and flight tracking functionalities. Now, let's move on to the next one, which is the Drone Tag BS. And yes, that means exactly what you think it means. It's an ultralight module, which comes in at $89. That's the cheapest in the category. It only weighs 1.5 grams, and it uses Bluetooth. Now, the BS can take 3.3 volt to 17 volt DC. That's 1S to 4S. And it has a very tiny footprint. Now, last up in this category is the Spektrum Sky ID. Now, this is a brand new one. This module comes with Bluetooth technology that transmits the remote ID message, and it comes at 14 grams. Now, the input voltage is between 3.3 and 9 volt, which is 1S to 2S. Now, the Sky ID is compatible with existing Spektrum receivers, and it comes with 4 different cables to power it. And then last up, we have the most complicated remote ID module of all of them. Now, this is as far as hooking it up. This is the Drone Tag DRI. Now, the DRI doesn't really come up with internal GPS, so you are required to use an external one in order to operate it. Now, the DRI can be operated in 2 different ways. You can use it as the UART pass-through if you want to use it as a module system, and then you can also use it as a standard remote ID, even though at this stage there is really no way to send the position of the controller into that message. So it's kind of questionable if it's a standard remote ID. Now, I recommend that you take a look at the documentation for this one because, well, it's pretty complex. We hooked it up to our Octozilla, and the range was, well, less than 50 feet. So not so good. At just 1.5 grams and $55, if you build autopilot drones that use ArduPilot, well, this could be a good choice for you. Now, setup can be a little bit painful, even for those that have a lot of experience with ArduPilot. You might be wondering which app was better at detecting drones. Well, we tested 6 different methods. The Drone Tag and the Drone Scanner app, those are available on iPhone. The Drone Scanner, the Air Sentinel, and the Open Drone ID apps are available on Android. And then we added on top of this a UAS Sentry receiver, which is a standalone device that's really designed in order to verify that your drone is compliant. It's not really supposed to be picking stuff from a very far distance. They actually have another device that will do that that's a bit more expensive. Now, the Drone Scanner app, both on Android and on iPhone, consistently detected longer ranges. The Air Sentinel app on Android only was a close second to the Drone Scanner app, and then the Open Drone ID app on Android was a third, very similar to the same results we got on the Sentry unit. Now, the Drone Tag app on the iPhone was
was, well, the most inconsistent, I would say. And then it even failed to pick up the Pierce Aerospace module and the Drone Tag Mini, which was picked up by the other app, which is very surprising because it's made by the same manufacturer. All right, here's a final table comparison so you can see everything in one place. Now you'll find the modules in the order in which we tested them, with the endurance, the weight, the size, the cost, and then the type, all in one place. Now you can download a PDF version that we're going to put down in the description below so it's nice and easy to read. We hope that this helps you make an informed decision at this stage about which of these you should get. Now, a big thank you to all the manufacturers that sent us their units. We had to buy some of them were given to us. Now, hopefully this helps you make a decision. Let us know which one you're going to pick for yourself. In terms of the registration, not really a whole lot has changed with the registration. You still have to register your drone the way you did before. So if you're using a standard remote ID drone, just go ahead and register that on the FAA Drone Zone, and then you're all set. If you're using a module, then you're gonna have to tell the FAA that you have this module that makes your drone compliant with remote ID. If you're operating under Part 107, you can only use one module at a time per registration. Right? You have 5 different aircraft. They all have a different registration number. You can only attach that module to one registration at a time. What the FAA has said is that you will be able to take the module and deregister it in the FAA Drone Zone so you can put it to another drone, another registration. It's going to be a bit of a painful process, but it is an option if you don't want to buy 5 different modules for each of your aircraft. If you're flying under recreational purposes, then because you only have one registration for all of your drone, one registration number, then you can use the modules and move them around between all the drones as often as you want. And I say drone, by the way, drone, SUAS, model aircraft, all mean the same thing. Drone is just a habit that I have of saying. So if you have a small fixed wing aircraft that you're using for aero modeling, then that's gonna fall under this category right here. And this is all I have for remote ID. So that's all you really need to know for the exam and for your general purpose about remote ID. Now you have enough to get dangerous. So I want to move to the next topic, which is the last topic in this regulation section, which is the NTSB requirements. So let's head over there. So by now, you know that you have to report accidents to the FAA within a certain period of time if requested. Now, there's another requirement. The FAA is one entity. The NTSB is another entity out there that controls when we have accident, National Transportation Safety Board. And they have an additional requirement on top of the FAA requirements. And this is often very confusing because with the FAA, we had that $500 limit, right? Well, this is a completely different requirement. I want you to think about 2 different agencies with 2 completely different requirements. Even if it doesn't have to be reported with the FAA, it may have to be reported by the NTSB and vice versa. So if we look in 49 CFR Part 830 and then under 830.2, we have a definition. And the definition is an unmanned aircraft accident. And the FAA or the NTSB, the regulation says that an accident, an unmanned aircraft accident, is an occurrence in which any person suffers death or serious injury. Okay, death or serious injury. Your next question is going to be, well, great, what's a serious injury? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's the information right here. Serious injury, that's for 830.2. Serious injury is an injury which, and there's 5 possible scenarios here, requires hospitalization for more than 48 hours within 7 days of being injured. Okay, that's step number 1. Or results in a fracture of any bones except minor fractures. I guess fingers, toes, or nose don't count in this case. Causes hemorrhages, nerve, muscle, or tendon damage. So that's another option. Involves any internal organs. Involves 2nd or 3rd degree burns, or any burns that are affecting more than 5% of the body's surface. So memorize these, I guess. It is important that you understand what constitutes a serious injury because the reporting requirement by the NTSB is one of the following. The operator must immediately report to the NTSB any of the following: an aircraft accident, anything I just mentioned in the previous slide, that is a requirement, needs to be reported immediately to the NTSB. Also, what needs to be reported immediately to the NTSB is a flight control failure or malfunction, an in-flight fire, an aircraft collision in flight, and then damage to property other than to the aircraft estimated to exceed $25,000 for repair. And it says in here, or fair market value in the event of total loss, whichever is less. So all of these things here need to be reported immediately to the NTSB. This is interesting. I mean, this is the same requirement that manned aircraft have, and this is in 830.5. If you want to read more of the regulation in more details, then you'll find the information in there. Now, with that being said, there are more bullet points in there, but they don't apply to drones. They apply to larger aircraft. They apply to multi-engine aircraft. There's a lot more requirement. But if you're interested, 830.5, go and take a look at it, and then you'll get a better idea. So that's all I have. Let's move to the final video here, and then we'll move on our merry way to the next presentation. What's up, guys? Today we're going to talk about something confusing, which is accident reporting for drones. And well, there is optional report, there's mandatory report. Some of them are mandatory for Part 107, some of them are not for recreational pilots. It's just a whole lot of confusion. So let's go into what you have to report, when you have to report it, how you have to report it, right in this video. Let's get to it. So you may say, well, what's the big deal about this? Well, the big deal is we hope that you never really have an accident, but you know what? Stuff happens. And when stuff happens, you need to know what you're supposed to report. And if you don't report, well, you can get in even more trouble, get a fine. If you have a Part 107 certificate, you could potentially lose your Part 107 certificate. So was there such a confusion? Well, I tell you, there's a confusion, and there is even a confusion for me, and I've been teaching this for a long, long time. There are several places where you can report accidents, where you have to report accidents. There's different types of requirements. There's different types of timelines where you have to report. What the heck is a NASA report? The heck is an ASRS report? So we're going to talk about all of this and try to remove all of this confusion. But first off, there's reporting for Part 107 pilots. There's some of that reporting that also applies to recreational pilots, and then there's also optional reporting. We're going to talk about all 3 of these. But the first one is the FAA reporting, because, well, we all report to the FAA in a way, right? Because they control all flights in the United States. Well, the FAA reporting is only contained in Part 107. If you're flying for recreational purposes, you're not following Part 107 regulation, you're following 44809 regulation, USC, the US code 44809. Under that, there is no real reporting requirement unless your CBO requires that there is a reporting requirement, okay? Remember, under 44809, you're supposed to follow CBO guidelines, CBO, community-based organizations. If that's the case, then you follow those. But let's talk about Part 107 FAA reporting. And what the FAA says is that you have to report to the FAA within 10 days any operation that involves at least the following: serious injury to any person or any loss of consciousness due to you flying your drone into someone, possibly, or any damage to any property for which the cost of repair exceeds $500, which, by the way, does not include the cost of your drone. You hit into somebody's car and you break the windshield. Chances are that's going to cost more than $500 to repair, in which case that needs to be reported to the FAA within 10 calendar days. These are the simple requirements, okay? Serious injury to anyone, loss of consciousness, that needs to be reported to the FAA. How do you do it? You go on the FAA Drone Zone, FAAdronezone.faa.gov, or you go to the local Flight Standard District Office. When you're on the FAA Drone Zone, as you can see in the background here, you just go to the accident reporting section, you give them all of the information, and then you're all set. That meets the requirement right here for Part 107. In addition to this, there's also the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, and they have a separate requirement. And you're going to say, what's the difference between the FAA and the NTSB? The NTSB only gets involved when there's an accident, okay? The FAA gets involved anytime you go fly. You talk to the NTSB when you crash something. And by the way, the NTSB doesn't do only flights. The NTSB takes care of if there's a train accident, okay? If there's a very large automobile or on-the-road accident, the NTSB is also going to get involved. Now, the requirement from the NTSB is this: you must report immediately, no 10 days here, immediately to the NTSB any of the following: an aircraft accident, we'll talk about that in a second; flight control system malfunction or failure, we'll talk about that as well in a minute; an in-flight fire, okay? Your battery catches on fire, the aircraft is on fire in flight, that's an in-flight fire right here. You need to report it. An aircraft collision in flight. If you collide with another aircraft in flight, you have to report it to the FAA. Damage to any property other than the aircraft that is estimated to exceed $25,000 in repair, okay? So in that case, that needs to be reported to the FAA. Now you're going to say, what in the world is an aircraft accident? Well, if we look in the regulation, Code of Federal Regulation, Title 14, 830.2, they define it as an occurrence where any person suffers death or serious injury. Death or serious injury. You're going to say, what is a serious injury? I'm glad you asked. In 8030.2, we have the definition. It's either a injury that requires hospitalization for more than 48 hours within 7 days of that injury being received, the fracture of any bones except fingers, toes, or your nose, anything that causes hemorrhages, nerve, muscle, or tendon damage, anything that involves an internal organ, and then anything that involves a second or third degree burn, or a burn that affects more than 5% of the body's surface. Now you're going to say this is a whole lot of government speak, and you're right. Take this, print it, put it on a card somewhere so you have it available as a reference. But when any of this happens, that needs to be reported to the NTSB, immediately. All right. Now you may ask, I mentioned flight control malfunction. What is a flight control malfunction? It says anything where you lose partial or complete control of the aircraft due to a hardware or software failure. Now, I want you to pause for a second. This was designed for the manned aircraft world. I'm flying my aircraft, all of a sudden I turn left with the control yoke, nothing happens. That's a flight control malfunction. The NTSB wants to know about this because this is a big deal. Okay, flight control malfunction in flight is a really big deal because that can lead to somebody crashing the aircraft. A flight control malfunction is not any of the following: loss of control because of pilot error. You're flying your FPV quad, you hit into a wall. That is not a flight control malfunction. You're operating outside of the aircraft envelope. That is not a flight control malfunction. You get a lost link. That is also not a flight control malfunction. Now you're going to scratch your head and say, why in the world do we need to report this to the FAA or to the NTSB or the FAA for that matter? The NTSB is interested in looking at trends. They are interested in finding out that something has failed that could fail somewhere else in another aircraft, in which case they want to investigate and then they want to share that information with other people, okay? I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, there was an issue with Piper aircraft where the way that the wing was attached to the fuselage was getting weak, was getting cracked. The NTSB heard of this, the FAA heard of this, they did some investigation, and then they came back and they said, well, this needs to be inspected. But the only way that this happens is because of reports like this, okay? So I don't want you to think about the NTSB as looking at finding when you make an error and you crash your drone into a wall. That's not the purpose here. The purpose is to find that something major has happened and that the NTSB wants to know about it because this is a safety issue, okay? Any loss of control of elevator, ailerons, rudders, and flaps, that is something the NTSB wants to know if you're flying a fixed-wing aircraft. Now, where do you report this? There's a link. I'm going to put it down here. It's on the ntsb.gov website. There's a full aviation report page. You can go in here, click on it, and it's going to ask you a whole bunch of questions, okay? So this right here is required for Part 107, also required for recreational pilots. Both of them are required to fill out these reports with the NTSB if something happens. The last report is an optional report. It's called a NASA report, or it's called an ASRS report. ASRS, Aviation Safety Reporting System. Why is it called a NASA report? Well, because NASA collects it on behalf of the FAA. This is a third-party thing. NASA reports, collects the data, makes it anonymous, and then provides the result to the FAA. And they're acting as a third party, so the FAA doesn't have to collect that data and have access to the name of the pilot. So when NASA shares that information with the FAA, they remove all personable information. The reason is they want to share the report. The name of the pilot doesn't matter. The data collected by the report is what matters. So that's the way that it works the way it does, is because that data needs to be anonymized, and NASA does that because they're not linked to the FAA. Now, this is optional, but highly recommended. This will allow a pilot or any other aviation professional for that matter, manned aircraft pilots, mechanics, unmanned aircraft pilots, they all have access to this. If they have a unintentional violation of regulation, you are getting close to an airport, you fly, you're looking down, all of a sudden you realize that you entered the airspace by mistake, okay? Stuff happens. NASA and the FAA says it's okay. Just tell us that it happened. Maybe we can learn something from it, and then we'll spread that information to other people if it happens a lot. So NASA is looking for trends using this report. You filing this report is sort of a get out of jail free card. If the FAA comes back and say, hey, we busted you, we know you entered the airspace, and you're going to say, hey, listen, I submitted this is in a NASA report, I know I busted it, I didn't do it on purpose, and here's the report right here. Now, it has to be accidental. You cannot submit a NASA report if you went into the airspace and busted it on purpose. The example I was always given in flight school was you're transporting drugs and you come back and you bust the airspace. You're going from our neighbors down in the south, you're collecting drugs, you bring it back across the border, and then you file a NASA report and you said, hey, I filed a report, I'm not at fault right here. Well, guess what? This was not accidental. You busted the airspace and you busted the regulation on purpose. You're not covered, all right? And it also must not result in an accident. So it must be something that you did that, well, that didn't affect anybody else in a sense. Busting the airspace is the perfect example, especially for drone pilots. All right? So that's kind of a quick recap right here. FAA reports only for Part 107. NTSB report, everybody else. Recreational and Part 107, everybody has to submit one of those if the requirements are met. ASRS or NASA report, same thing. That's an optional thing for both Part 107 and recreational pilots, but highly recommended. How do you submit the ASRS report? You're going to go to the NASA link that we put down here. It's pretty lengthy, so make sure that you read it first. Give them as much information as you can. They'll be happy because they're collecting data and trend, and that's how we get this industry to be better. That's all I have for right now. Leave your comments down in here if you have any. Like, subscribe so we can do more of these videos for you guys, and then I'll see you for the next video.